Angela Slater, also known as A.G. Slater, is the author of The Path of Thorns and All the Murmuring Bones. Both are Gothic fantasies set in the world that she created for her Sourdough and Bitterwood collections, which are short stories. She has also collaborated with Mike Mignola on the Hellboy Universe comics in Castle Full of Blackwords. She has also collaborated with Mike Mignola on the Hellboy Universe comics in Castle Full of Blackbirds and is a creative writing tutor at the Australian Writers' Centre, and her students love her. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome, Val.
Your book, The Path of Thorns, congratulations. You're such an incredible author. Oh, my goodness. For people who haven't got a copy yet, can you tell us what it's about?
It is about Asher Todd, who arrives at the remote Moorwood Grange, ostensibly to become the governess to three small children. But Asher actually has more secrets even than the family who lives in Moorwood Grange. And it doesn't really go well for anybody. So that's what it's about.
Now, how did this idea form? When did this idea come into your head and you realised I have a story here?
I had been thinking a lot about Frankenstein and Jane Eyre, and wondering, what would happen if you could get elements of those two stories put together. That's kind of what happened there. And also as a teenager, I was a huge fan of the Gothic drama series Dark Shadows. So my editor, Kath Trackman at Titan, just sort of went, oh, if there was a Gothic Olympics, this would win the Gothic Olympics. So there's a lot of Gothic in there.
Fantastic. So you have set it in a world that is mesmerizing, but one that you're very familiar with. And when the reader steps into this world, they're immersed from minute one. Where did this world come from? Or maybe if you could describe the world to readers and then tell us where this world came from.
It's the world that sort of lives inside my head, which is enough to terrify anybody. It's a mashup of the fairy tales that I was read as a child and really loved, and also my love of history. So whenever if I'm getting some artwork done for this world, I'll say to Kathleen Jennings, oh, well, I like this dress with the Renaissance bodice, but if you can then put a Victorian era skirt on it, so I can put together all of those things that I really like and create a new sort of an aesthetic. So I think it's key to people recognizing the world when they've had fairy tales in their lives. They'll recognize that, and also, oh yes, this looks like, on the page, the setting's very strong. It looks like a Victorian aesthetic. Oh, but that's a bit Middle Ages, or this is Renaissance. So there are just those elements of recognizable items that will put the reader at home. But then when the fairy tale stuff starts coming to life, they go, oh, okay, yes, we're not in Kansas anymore. So,
And when did you first create this world on paper? And was it with the intention of writing a published novel, or were you just creating the world for yourself?
I was just messing around with fairy tales. I was doing a master's at QUT back in 2005 and 2004 actually, and rewriting fairy tales. So that was kind of where I just started dipping into that. And around about 2009, I realized that I had quite a few stories that had the world felt similar. I had built something, and I was starting to refer to characters from other stories in these stories. And I eventually ended up going, well, here's 4 stories that I've written and have been published already, and here's another 10 stories that I've written, all with intent to be in this world. So I put them together in what's called a mosaic collection, and that became Sourdough and Other Stories, which was the first book in this kind of world, in this series. And that was shortlisted for the World Fantasy Award, so something must have been right with it. I did a second one in 2014, which was the Bitterwood Bible, and it won the World Fantasy Award. And then after a very long 7-year hiatus of me writing very slowly, we brought out The Tallow Wife and Other Tales, which has also been shortlisted for the World Fantasy Award. So those come out in November. And then I hadn't done a full-length novel in the world. And a few years ago, we started, talking about it with my agent and new publisher, and we ended up with All the Murmuring Bones, which was released last year. And it's got, a lot of fairy tale and mermaid mythology in that one. And then The Path of Thorns came along in the ideas box. So, yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know I'm asking a lot of questions about you building this world, but I think it's so important because it's deeply immersive and believable. So when you were creating it for the first time, or even, throughout ongoing, because I guess worlds evolve and change, do you have your own kind of dossier or Pinterest board or anything of that nature, or does it purely live in your head and you know that this is the word for, whatever, and you know that, oh no, they wouldn't do that, they'd do this, or they wouldn't say that, they'd say this?
It is mostly in my head, and because I've now created so much content in this world, I'm going to need to start putting it together in some kind of dossier, as you said, because there's a lot of crossing of paths of different characters, and particularly the end of All the Murmuring Bones has a lead on into the Tallow Wife, and then the Tallow Wife also references another novella called The Bone Lantern, and the Bone Lantern references The Path of Thorns. So I'm making a huge mess for myself. I do keep, copies of illustrations that are of inspiration to me, like for clothing or for faces, for locations. If you're describing a particular grove or waterfall or house, whenever I have a large family mansion in these stories, I do spend a lot of time trolling the internet and picking the one that I either like or I can mash up with another one to get the strange sort of effect that I want. Particularly in All the Murmuring Bones, that was what I really was looking for. There's a place in Ireland called Hoff's Head, something like that, which I turned into Hobbs Head, and a few different castles got mashed up from different eras because I wanted this idea of a family who'd been there for a really long time, and everyone took on their obligation or their wish to build a new thing to this house, which made it look very strange indeed. But yes, I do need to get a bit more organized. I've actually been lucky. One of my readers is a huge fan, and he's done what I really need, a list of characters for the first 3 books.
Wow.
The collections. So that's going to help enormously when you have quite a few characters in a book, and then you start another book and you don't want to be reusing names, because I try to go with an interesting range of names. So as long as I can keep track of those, hopefully it'll all be okay.
So I want to talk about dialogue, because the dialogue that you have is very much of this world, but also very natural and completely believable. And I think that's an incredible skill, because I read books set in other worlds, and sometimes the dialogue's a bit jarring like that. It's what you'd say in 2022 in Sydney, you know. So in terms of the dialogue, what were you thinking of when you wanted to create the way they spoke, which is, you know, completely normal? As I say, it's not weird or anything. It's really of this world, but it is different.
It's different. I'm very I have an obsession with communication. So how do you speak to people? How do you do your best to influence them or communicate with them? So that's something I think that goes into my dialogue. And it's another one of the things that I'm constantly emphasizing to students is use contractions, because the language of your world will come through in sometimes how you arrange a sentence, in the use of words that are specific to your world, terms that are specific to your world, but you still need to use contractions because it sounds more natural. It makes the flow of the conversation feel a lot smoother. It has a much better pace. So you don't really want your post-apocalyptic werewolf warrior to sound like he's the Dowager Duchess from Downton Abbey. Or maybe you do, but that's a different kind of book. So it's also very much about deep diving into your character and knowing who they are and what they'd say, how they would say it, the kind of relationship they have with the person they're speaking with. If it's someone that they don't know very well, but they're bickering with them, then they're probably going to dip into insults a fair bit. It will be fast. It won't be long sentences. It will be snippy, snappy dialogue. So yes, so it's not just slap it on the page and hope for the best. It's a fair bit of well, the first draft brain vomit of, you know, this is what they say, and then you come back on your redrafting phase, editing phase, and go, okay, well, definitely she would not say that. She would use this word. So so yes, so it's a matter of crafting over several drafts.
So let's talk about deep diving into your character. So when do you do the deep diving and the process of characterization before you even start writing, or is it something that occurs during the brain vomit?
I really only get a slim idea of who the other characters are when I'm writing. I always start with my main character. When they start speaking to me, that's when I know what to put down. I can see them somewhere, and I feel, oh, well, this has legs. Let's see where it goes. And then as I'm moving them through the space, they'll be meeting other people as they go. For example, when Asha arrives at Morewood, she's alone. She's just gotten off the carriage. She's walking through the estate along the driveway to get to the big house, and something's following her. So this is the start. We get an idea of the sort of person she is, because I thought I want her to be afraid, because this is a weird situation. But I don't want her to show it, because I want her to have her proverbial together enough to know that you don't show fear. So as she's walking, eventually she does get to the house, and I thought an old butler. I want an old butler there, and he looks a particular way, and he will be kind. The kindness won't be inaccurate, but there'll be limits to it, and there'll be things that she finds out later that suggest, you know, oh, actually he's not perfect. He's not this gentleman who opened the door for her with open arms and welcomed her into the Morewood household. He too has his foibles. So I think about them to a certain level, but as I'm moving the character through the story and having them take different actions and putting them to different settings and making decisions, I'm weighing up what the other characters around them are like, because then you have to go on and think, okay, well, my character has done this. What is this character going to think? How are they going to react? Are they going to try to prevent it? If they try to prevent it, doesn't make the situation better or worse. So in my head, it's kind of an infernal choose your own adventure.
But that's a really interesting point. So you say that when you're writing, you put your main character in, or whatever character, in a particular situation, and then you're thinking about how the other characters would react to that situation. What does that look like? Are you in the middle of writing and then you're thinking, okay, there are 4 other characters here that this is going to impact in some way. I'm going to think through each of these interactions, or I'm going to think from their point of view what's going to happen? Or is it just something that happens in the background of your head? Like, how intentional is this process?
Mostly it's happening in the background, or it's the background program in my head, because I'm and if I say I've got four characters in the scene, I'm always aware of not forgetting any of them. So if you start the scene, say so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so is here, they either have to say something or be seen to be having a reaction, or you have to have them leave the room. So you've gotten them off screen. You don't have to worry about them at that stage, but you should pick up with them later, because if they've left the room, it's for a reason. Either because they've left the iron on in the other room, or this is a terrible plan and I will have no part of it. Good luck to you. I said good day, sir. So I'm always thinking about the function of the scene as well, and there's definitely less intent of that when I'm doing the brain vomit draft, because I'm just trying to get the story out. And it's when it comes back to the editing phase that I'm going, okay, what do I keep? What do I get rid of? What works best for the story? Because the whole point of this story is that something has to move forward. The story must move forward in some way, shape, or form. Even if you've got your character in a dungeon and they can't do anything, they don't have a teaspoon, they can't dig their way out. What the thing that will move the story forward is what's going on in their head as they think their way through. So what are they deciding to do? Are they having a dark night of the soul when they realize they've been a terrible person? That's why they're here in the dungeon. Or are they thinking, I'm going to get all of you when I get out of this damn dungeon? And that speaks very much to your character there.
Yes. So let's talk about the actual process and time period of the Path of Thorns. So we'll use this book as an example. How long did it take for the brain vomit from when you started and till when you were satisfied with that version, the first draft? And did you, like, how frequently were you writing the brain vomit?
It's
I love how we're calling it the brain vomit. I mean, really.
The brain vomit, which I think I stole that term from Sean Williams many years ago when he was teaching me at Clarion. But I always think it's the most accurate description of your first draft.
And in case anyone's not clear, we are talking about the first draft.
First draft. It's the first draft. No, you do not present your brain vomit to a publisher or an agent. It will not go well for you. It's one of those things. I think I brain vomited the first 40,000 words probably 2 years ago, and then went into a sort of a hiatus because I was working on edits for All the Murmuring Bones, and then I had to come back to it. So probably all up, it would have covered 2 years between the initial 40,000 words to last March 7th, when I was literally doing my final fixes and answers to the proofreader for the publisher the day before it went off to be typeset and going.
So hang on, that was 2 years for the whole process.
The whole process.
Okay, so let's just talk about first draft. If you just took your first 40,000 words and then when you finished the rest of the first draft, how long do you think that took?
I think that probably,
without the gap in between.
No, without the gap in between. I think that probably would have been about 8 months, 7 to 8 months.
Okay, all right. So when you are in the throes of writing that first draft, I'm going to stop myself from calling it brainstorming. When you're in the throes of writing that first draft, is it something that's your singular focus, and you carve out, you block out time for writing? And what does your day look like? Like, are you a night writer, a day writer, an early morning writer? I think I know the answer to that, but you can tell us.
Probably when I first started out, I was more of a night writer, but as I've gotten further along in my career, and this is my 18th year, I think, that I've been doing this as a professional, I have had to do more in the day because there are other demands on my time. So if I'm having writing time where I have just blocked out pure writing time, I wake up and check the emails, check the socials. That takes half an hour. And I'm very disciplined about it, because otherwise it can be, the old time suck of Facebook forever. And then I will open up the documents. I'll look at my spreadsheet, which has the vague plan on it, which I like to call the bucket of chaos. So basically it just has a framework and then ideas within that. And I will read probably the last 100 words of the chapter I wrote before, and then I will go on. I would love to every day just knock over a chapter of 2,000 words. That doesn't always work. It doesn't always work sitting at the computer, because sometimes there's just something that your mind is catching on that you haven't quite got right yet. The big thing for me that I always find is that I make my main characters too good to start out with.
What do you mean?
They're without fault. And which is dumb. But you start out, you think, well, I like this character, I want to think the best of them. So that's the big process for me, is going, I have run into a wall. Clearly I'm not being realistic about this character, about what they do or what they'd say. They're not a saint. So I do think all of us are faced with situations where we should do something better, but sometimes we just don't, because we're having a bad day, or the person that we're dealing with has done us dirty in the past. So I have to make my character make a bad choice. And the thing is, in the story, the consequences of that are generally greater than the consequences of doing the right thing. So that's what pushes your story along. That's the engine of your story. Creates the conflict, creates the obstacles. So that's what I will have to do, is go, right, she's being too nice, have her do something awful, make a bad decision. How badly is that going to affect her world? So sometimes that doesn't come sitting at the computer. Sometimes that comes because I will go and walk around the block, talking to myself madly, and scaring the neighbours. Just to
Are you talking to yourself? Are you talking?
I am. The place I used to live a few years back, I would take my phone with me and put on record and do laps of the park. And just be talking like this. And the great thing about that is that you're free from the backspace key. You're just having a conversation. No one interrupts you. And then I would go home, and I would generally find that the things I had talked about, I'd worked out the solution, because there was nothing else. It was just sort of roaming brain.
So
wait.
you're literally talking to yourself. You're not actually
I'm-
dictating the story.
No, I'm literally talking to myself, Val. There is nothing dignified about this process. You need to realize that. It's quite mad. But I would then go home and I would transcribe my notes, and generally I found that had fixed the problem.
Wow.
Or you know what, some days it's a couple of months down the track and I've had to leave it alone because it was just getting like picking at a sore, and I had to go off and do another project, and you'll be sitting in front of the news or Mikhailov or the latest binge series, and just something in the back brain will go, hey, I figured that out, and at which point you have to run downstairs and open up the document and start.
Isn't it amazing when that happens? It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes it's in the shower, and that's not
Yes.
helpful to anybody.
But
what I
unless you have waterproof notes.
Markers, yes, waterproof notes. And that's the other one I often say to students: get the crayons that they have for kids in the bathtub. Keep them in the shower. Because
there's a thing called Aqua Notes that's actually just a waterproof notepad.
You know, you would know the full IT, high IT solution, whereas I'm like, children's crayons in the bathtub.
No, it's not technology. It's actual waterproof paper and pen. Someone sent it to me once when I said, "Oh, I have all these ideas in the shower." And anyway, okay, so. When you finished your first draft, sent it to the publisher, what did the editing process look like? Was there a lot or not much that you had to amend or tweak or change?
There was nothing big with the structure. There was one character that I had planned to kill, and I wrote the murder scene. And that went off in the first draft to my publisher, and I had such great sadness about it. But then Kath came back and said, I don't know if she needs to die. And I jumped at that and I went, no, I think you're right. I would really like her to live. So she was resurrected, but also structurally very little changed. But I think it's really important for other writers, newer writers, to know this, is that we don't produce perfect first drafts. We don't know everything. And I had gotten towards the end of the book and was just exhausted and struggling. So I just started killing characters and putting them in the well in the backyard. And I had literally put a note to Kath saying, I fear there are too many bodies in the back. Well, she said, yes, there are. Let's try and kill them in different ways. So that was just a matter of working out how those characters were actually dealt with. But pretty much all of the characters remained the same in terms of personality, mostly what they did. I think I was lucky with that one, possibly because I'd taken so long over the manuscript that it was very solid. But that being said, you still have a lot of I had probably 3 developmental edit passes with Kath, my editor. Then I had 3 copy edit passes with Hayley, who is the amazing copy editor who put together a timeline of everything that happened, and for which all writers are so pathetically grateful they will cry, because sometimes you just lose track. It's you can't see the wood for the trees. And then 3 passes with the proofreader.
Wow.
Spelling. And as I said, I was literally answering proofreader questions the night before it was going to print.
Wow.
So that was the tightest deadline we've worked on with those books.
So you've now come to the end of that process. Now, the thing is, like, when, for example, I read book set in a contemporary setting. I get to the end and, you know, I feel satisfied or whatever, but I don't feel kind of a sense of loss because I feel like I'm going to turn the corner and meet someone similar at the local cafe or whatever. I mean, it depends on the book, right? But with your world, when you get to the end of the story, the reader emerges from this world, and it's kind of like, oh, so as a writer, how do you feel at the end when you're no longer in it? Like it's done, and you know you've got to come back to Brisbane.
Come back to the real world. Yeah. You feel very much like the reader, and I think it's important that I can transmit that sense of loss to my reader. So I'm suffering, everyone else must share it with me. Because you've lived in this place and you've had, you know, not necessarily a lovely time, but you've been dreaming up your imaginary friends, and that's an absolute joy to me. So the next thing is to say, okay, well, what is the next book? Who have I got in this gallery of characters? I mean, there's still 2 characters from the Path of Thorns that I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe they find each other later, and it's like a buddy movie kind of, you know, road movie on a quest. But that's just vague notes in another shiny notebook at the moment.
So you haven't developed your next novel yet in your head?
I have.
Oh, you have?
There's 30,000 words on the Briar book.
Oh.
So in which Ellie Briar is the only daughter born in a family of witches who has no power. So her fate is basically to be the administrator to her cousin Audra, who will be the next Briar witch after their grandmother Gisela dies. But it ends up, oh gosh, there's some ghosts, there's some witches, there's a militant church marching on the City of Witches. There are dancing monument stones, there's some vampires, there are disappearing families. So there's quite a lot happening there, Val.
Your brain is a very unusual place to be.
I think that is the politest thing anyone's ever said.
All right. So you're currently 30,000 words in. Well, this is very exciting. So when is this due? Or when do you think you're going to finish it?
Well, in theory, it's due in February next year, but I'm actually hoping to have it finished by mid-December this year and have it off to Kath to just sort of start that editing process again, and just be a bit ahead of schedule.
Did you always want to be a writer when you were younger? Like,
I did.
Right.
I was. It's when I started school and dinosaurs walked the earth, they had stopped teaching you how to spell. They stopped teaching phonetics. It was just a change over, and my mum noticed how appalling my spelling was in grade 1. So so she handed me a book and I started reading on my own. She'd always read to me, but it was like, no, actually, here's your gateway drug, darling. Have a book. And that was it for me. And that was largely how I learned to spell. That was largely how I developed a frightening vocabulary. My dad, I would ask my dad, oh, what does such and such a word mean? He'd just look at me and say, well, you know, the dictionary is over there. Go to the dictionary, which was the Oxford Classical. Until many, many years later, he asked me what a word meant. And I said, go to the dictionary. And he said, well, I just did, but she's not very helpful. So I always loved the idea that, oh, you know, these are these books, they're magic, and wouldn't it be great if I could create one? And for the longest time, I just thought that was not a possibility, because they had to be magical creatures in order to create these magical, amazing things. And as I got older, I realized that actually there's more things that you can do, and there are more things in the world that you will dare to do. And I got to the point I was very tired of corporate jobs, which I had been doing for a very long time. And I thought, you know what, if I don't try this, I'm going to go to my grave with, a list of, I wish I had done this kind of thing. So, so when I was 37, I threw in a corporate job and moved back to Brisbane from Sydney, and started to learn how to be a writer. So
Love it. Love it. And we're all very grateful for it. So this is so exciting. Congratulations on the Path of Thorns. Of course, I always end with, what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who would love to be writing their own novels and creating their own worlds one day?
Top 3 tips. Okay, I think the first one is read widely, because see what is out there in the market, and also read other genres, because it will teach you how to write other things really well. Crime will teach you how to plot and to manage suspense. Romance will teach you how to write relationships that feel realistic. So that's number 1. Number 2 is network. Even in these times of going around with masks, we have more festivals happening. Go along and listen to the panels, go along and meet people, meet other writers, because sometimes you will hear about opportunities through other writers. And that always helps, I think. And it's not about working out what everyone can do for you. It's about building mutually beneficial relationships. Sometimes you will help someone, sometimes they will help you. And the last thing is just keep learning. I don't think we ever stop learning. Even at my stage, there's always something I can pick up from a craft book or from talking to my peers. Just rereading students' work as well, and seeing if there are problems in there. Oh, have I done that as well? So I think being aware that you're not always going to know everything. So keep learning.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on the Path of Thorns, and everyone, you should go get yourself a copy. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Val.